I told my husband I would never agree to polyamory, but after he asked me twice more to reconsider, I can't shake the ick, and now I'm deciding whether to end the marriage before my trust in him is completely gone. I spoke the words into the heavy silence of our living room, but they felt like they belonged to a stranger. An hour ago, Caleb was my rock, the man I trusted with my life. Now, sitting across from me on our gray sofa, he looked like an intruder wearing my husband's face. We spent 4 years building this life. Before the wedding, we discussed every pillar of our future, especially fidelity. I thought we were safe within those walls. He was helpful, the kind of partner who made coffee before I woke up. Tonight, he started with that same gentleness. He took my hands, his palms warm and familiar, and said he needed to talk. I worried about his health or his job, never suspecting he was holding a sledgehammer over the foundation of our entire world. He didn't own the desire at first. He hid behind his best friend. He told me that his friend and his wife were polyamorous, speaking about their arrangement with a breathless, voyeuristic focus. He watched my eyes, searching for a spark of curiosity I didn't possess. Then came the pivot. He admitted they had been discussing it in depth. He said he thought he might like to try it, asking casually what I thought. It was a loaded gun placed gently on the coffee table. A cold wave of nausea hit my stomach. We had an active sex life, and he had never given me reason to doubt his devotion. I pulled my hands away, the contact suddenly repulsive. I told him firmly that I had zero interest in sharing him. I wanted monogamy. I wanted the exclusivity we promised each other. I expected him to retreat, to see my distress and apologize. Instead, he didn't move. He just sat there, waiting for me to change my mind. That silence was the first fracture. Then he pushed. He asked if I would read some literature before deciding, implying my boundaries were just ignorance. I said no again, my voice trembling but clear. I told him I knew who I was. He ignored me. He asked a third time, begging me to just think about it. It felt like coercion. He looked at me not as a wife, but as an obstacle he needed to maneuver around to get what he wanted. Something snapped inside my chest. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a violent, physical revulsion. The eek flooded my system, stripping away his attractiveness until he looked small and pathetic. I stood up, desperate to escape the air he was breathing. I told him I was sleeping in the guest room. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on my back, confused that his sales pitch failed. He thought he was opening a door, but he had just locked me out forever. The guest room smelled of stale lavender and dessous. I turned the lock, the heavy click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. That first night, I stared at the ceiling shadows, waiting for tears that never came. Instead, my brain ran a cold, analytical loop of our conversation. Caleb knocked around midnight, whispering through the wood that he loved me. It sounded like a script. I didn't answer. I pulled the stiff duvet tighter, realizing I felt safer alone in this cold bed than I did next to him. Morning brought no clarity, only suffocating tension. Caleb was brewing coffee, acting as if the previous night was a minor spat about dishes. He offered me a mug with a hopeful, boyish smile that used to melt me. Now, it looked practiced. He chatted about work, pointedly avoiding the elephant in the room. I took the mug but didn't drink. The steam rising from the cup felt like a fog, he was trying to cast over my memory. He was actively rewriting history right in front of me. "I think you misunderstood me," he said, leaning against the counter. He claimed it was just a fantasy, a hypothetical scenario he wanted to explore intellectually. But I saw the lie in his jaw's tension. You don't ask your wife to read literature on polyamory for a passing whim. He had researched this. He had vocabulary ready. The casualness was a mask for a plan he had been nurturing while I was planning our anniversary. He wasn't asking for permission. He was negotiating the terms of my surrender. I spent the next 2 days dodging him. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital just to avoid coming home. When I did return, the air in the apartment felt thick and pressurized. I saw him watching me, tracking my movements with a mix of desperation and annoyance. The ick wasn't fading. It was calcifying into resentment. Every time he tried to brush against my arm, my skin crawled. It wasn't just that he wanted others. It was that he didn't value us enough to protect me. On Saturday afternoon, I drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away to make the call. My hands shook as I dialed my father's number. Elias wasn't just my dad. He was a shark of a divorce attorney. I didn't tell him everything, just asked for hypothetical advice. I asked about infidelity clauses and coercive control. His voice was steady, grounding me in legal reality. He told me to secure my finances. Hearing his professional tone turned my sadness into strategy. I wasn't just a weeping wife anymore. I was a client. I returned to the apartment to find Caleb pacing. The nice guy mask had finally slipped. He demanded to know why I was punishing him for being honest. He stepped into my personal space, looming over me with a dark, petulant energy I had never seen. He tried to grab my waist, insisting we needed to reconnect physically to fix this. I recoiled violently, backing into the wall. "Don't," I snapped. His face twisted, not with hurt, but with genuine anger that I denied him access. The bone was shattered. The clinic waiting room was a purgatory of beige chairs and muted television news. I wasn't there for a checkup. I was there for an audit of my marriage. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, didn't ask why a married woman needed a full panel. She just snapped the blue latex gloves against her wrists. The sound echoed the snap of my heart breaking days ago. I watched my blood fill the vials, dark and rich. It felt like I was draining the last of my loyalty to Caleb into those vacuum-sealed tubes. When I returned, the apartment smelled of roasting chicken. Caleb was cooking, humming a tune we used to dance to. It was a grotesque pantomime of domestic bliss. He smiled when I entered, wiping his hands on a dish towel, pretending the wall of ice between us had melted. He asked about my day, his voice light. I didn't answer. I just placed my purse on the counter with a heavy thud. The noise cut through his humming like a knife. He stopped moving, the dish towel suddenly still in his hands. "I went to get tested," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Caleb flinched, his eyes darting to the floor. I didn't let him recover. I leaned against the quartz island, crossing my arms to hold myself together. "If this is just a fantasy, Caleb, show me the context." I told him I needed to see the conversations with his friends. I needed to see how he spoke about us. If it was innocent, the logs would prove it. If not, his silence would scream. His hand instinctively went to his pocket, covering the outline of his phone. It was a reflex, fast and defensive. "That's an invasion of privacy, Ray," he said, his tone shifting from husband to lawyer. He argued that his friends expected confidentiality, that I was being paranoid. He tried to spin it, making me the villain for asking. But I wasn't listening to his words. I was watching his knuckles turn white as he gripped his jeans. He was terrified I would see that screen. "Privacy is for the bathroom, Caleb. Secrecy is for liars." I stepped closer, extending my hand palm up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just waited. For a moment. I thought he might yield. He looked at my hand, then at my face, calculating the cost of refusal versus the cost of exposure. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then he took a step back. He shook his head slowly, choosing to protect the device over his wife. The choice was made. I didn't fight him for it. I didn't need to read the messages to know what they said. His refusal was a confession written in neon. I walked past him, ignoring the smell of the burning chicken in the oven. He called my name, his voice cracking with feigned indignation, but I kept walking. The negative test result would come back in a few days, but it didn't matter. Innocence has nothing to hide, but Caleb was guarding that screen like a live grenade. 2 weeks of silence transformed our apartment into a tomb. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, avoiding the spaces Caleb occupied. The air conditioner hummed, masking the sound of his breathing whenever we were in the same room. I was folding laundry, matching his socks with a mechanical detachment, when my phone buzzed against the heavy hardwood table. It wasn't a text from my dad or a notification from the hospital. It was a direct message on Instagram. The preview showed a woman's name I recognized only from Caleb's stories. I sat on the floor, the pile of socks forgotten. The profile picture showed a smiling couple, radiant and polished. This was the poly friend Caleb had mentioned. The blueprint he wanted us to copy. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. Opening it felt like breaking a seal on a hazardous material container. The message was long, a wall of text that started with a simple, terrifying sentence. "Hey Raylan, I think we need to clear something up." The politeness of the greeting made my stomach drop. I didn't reply. I pressed the call button. I needed to hear the truth in a human voice, not read it on a screen. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless and apologetic. "I didn't think you'd call," she said. Her voice was kind, but that didn't matter now. She asked if I was alone. I lied and said yes, though Caleb was in the next room watching television. I moved to the balcony, sliding the glass door shut. "Tell me," I whispered. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath and shattered my reality. "Caleb told us you were on board," she said. "He said you guys had a don't ask, don't tell policy." My grip on the railing tightened until my knuckles turned white. He hadn't just asked for permission. He had manufactured it. She explained that they had been seeing him for months, assuming I was happily living my own separate life. Every late night at the office, every weekend, errand, fell into place like Tetris blocks from hell. I felt dizzy and lightheaded. Then came the second blow. "It wasn't just me," she added gently. "He was with Mark too." The world tilted. Caleb had never mentioned being bisexual. Not once in 4 years. I didn't care about the orientation. I cared that I didn't know the man I married. I had been sleeping next to a stranger who explored a whole other side of himself, while I planned our grocery lists. He denied me his truth while sharing his body with them. It wasn't the sex that killed me, it was the intimacy. We broke it off, she continued, her voice hardening. We found out yesterday he was lying to you. We don't do non-consensual non-monogamy. The irony tasted like ash. These strangers had more respect for my marriage than my husband did. They had dumped him the moment they realized I was in the dark. That explained his mood swings this week, the desperation, the sudden desire to fix things. He wasn't trying to save us because he loved me. He was panicked because he had lost his backup plan. I hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the city lights blurring through my tears. The traffic below rushed by, indifferent to the crater in my chest. He had played us all. He used their lifestyle as a cover for his cowardice, and used my trust as a shield for his secrets. The ick that started as a gut feeling was now a dark, verified diagnosis. I wasn't just disgusted by the ask anymore. I was repulsed by his entire existence. He was a hollow man, echoing with lies. I walked back inside. The sliding door sealing out the city noise. Caleb looked up from the couch, his face bathed in the blue light of the television. He offered a tentative smile, completely unaware that his house of cards had just been bulldozed. He looked so small. The fear I had felt for weeks evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the vase on the table. I just looked at him and saw a liability I needed to liquidate immediately. I went to the bedroom and packed a single bag, moving quietly. He thought we were in a stalemate, but the game was already over. I had the truth now, and it was a weapon I planned to use. He hadn't just asked a question that night. He was looking for retroactive permission for a crime he'd already committed. I zipped the bag shut. The sound final and sharp. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a witness for the prosecution, and I was done testifying. The hospital cafeteria was loud, a perfect cover for treason. I sat across from Sarah, a fellow resident needing a roommate, and watched her slide the lease across the sticky table. It looked like a generic form, but to me, it was a lifeline. I signed it without reading the fine print. I didn't care about the rent or the view. I just needed a door that locked from the inside. Sarah asked if I was okay, noticing my trembling hand. Never better. I lied. I was building a life raft while the ship was still sinking. My father's office was the next stop. Elias didn't hug me when I walked in. He handed me a pen. The draft petition for divorce sat on his mahogany desk, heavy and final. We listed adultery as the cause. Seeing the word printed there made the betrayal real in a way the phone call hadn't. He's going to fight this, Dad warned. I nodded, knowing Caleb's pride. I wasn't afraid of a fight anymore. I just wanted the bell to ring so the round could end. I signed my name, turning a marriage into a case file. Returning to the apartment required a performance worthy of an Oscar. Caleb was waiting, eyes scanning my face for clues. I told him I was picking up extra shifts to explain the late hours. He seemed to buy it, desperate to believe we were returning to a routine. I cooked dinner, moving around him like a satellite in a decaying orbit. Every polite exchange felt like acid on my tongue. I was feeding the enemy while memorizing the exits. The deception was exhausting. But I needed the time to move my pieces into place. I packed in micro, bursts to avoid detection. When he was in the shower, I shoved sweaters into trash bags and hid them in the deep recesses of the closet. When he walked the dog, I emptied my jewelry box. I was erasing myself from the home we built, one trinket at a time. It felt like I was robbing my own house. I left the photos on the walls to maintain the illusion. If he noticed the gaps, he didn't say anything. He was too busy pretending he hadn't destroyed us to look closely at the shelves. By Thursday, the air in the apartment shifted. Caleb stopped trying to be the sweet husband and became jagged. He paced the living room, muttering about how distant I was. He cornered me in the kitchen, asking why I wouldn't look him in the eye. "I am just tired," I said, retreating. He didn't believe me. He could smell the ozone of a coming storm. He started texting constantly when I was at work, demanding my location. It wasn't love. It was a tightening leash. He sensed the invisible wires I was cutting and panicked. I had planned to leave on Saturday, while he was at a conference. But Friday morning, he called in sick. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, vibrating with a chaotic energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. He poured a drink at 9 a.m. "We need to talk tonight," he said, his voice flat. My timeline evaporated. I couldn't wait for the weekend. I texted my dad a single word now. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a hostage negotiator planning a jailbreak. Caleb's whiskey glass clinked against the granite. A sharp sound that signaled the end of his patience. He moved toward me, his movements sloppy but purposeful, eyes dark with accusation. He ranted about me punishing him, about how cold I'd become, twisting the narrative until he was the victim of my boundaries. I backed toward the hallway, gouging the distance to the front door. He lunged, not to hit me, but to grab my wrist, desperate to force a connection. His grip was clammy, a physical manifest of his desperation. "You need to stop this," he hissed, pulling me closer until I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "We're married, Raylan. You don't get to just turn it off." The revulsion was instant and absolute, freezing my blood. I didn't see my husband. I saw a predator demanding a meal I hadn't offered. I wrenched my arm free with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The sudden violence of the motion shocked him enough to make him stumble back. I didn't wait for him to recover. I sprinted for the entryway, grabbing the emergency bag I had stashed behind the coat rack. "Where are you going?" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He scrambled after me, tripping over the rug, but I was already turning the deadbolt. My fingers fumbled with the latch, adrenaline making them clumsy, but the mechanism finally clicked. I threw the door open and stepped into the hallway's fluorescent glare. I didn't look back at his pleading face. I just ran for the elevator, hitting the down button like a lifeline. The lobby was a sanctuary of cool air and indifference. I paced in front of the glass doors, watching the street from my father's sedan. My phone buzzed with texts from Caleb. Apologies, threats, nonsensical rambling. But I let them pile up unread. I felt like a fugitive in my own life, shivering despite the heat. When the familiar silver car pulled up to the curb, relief buckled my knees. My dad and uncle stepped out, grim-faced and solid. They looked like an army of two, coming to extract a prisoner of war. We went back up together. The elevator ride was silent, charged with the grim determination of an execution squad. My dad held a manila envelope. My uncle just cracked his knuckles. I keyed into the apartment, the sound announcing our invasion. Caleb was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. But he scrambled up when he saw the men behind me. His aggression evaporated instantly, replaced by a terrified shrinking. He looked between my father's stony face and my uncle's crossed arms, realizing he was hopelessly outgunned. "I am leaving, Caleb," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I moved past him to the bedroom, my uncle trailing me as a silent guard. Caleb tried to follow, stammering about how we could talk this out. How I was being dramatic. "You can't just bring your family into this," he whined, trying to regain control of the room. He sounded like a child caught breaking a vase, not a man fighting for his marriage. He still thought this was a debate he could win. I tossed the last of my essentials into a suitcase, ignoring his protests. He grabbed the doorframe, blocking my exit, his eyes wild. "You are ruining everything over a question," he screamed, the mask slipping again. "I never did anything. I just asked." The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was the final insult. I stopped packing and turned to face him, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I needed him to know that I saw everything. I needed to burn the bridge while he was standing on it. "I know about the couple, Caleb," I said quietly. The color drained from his face so fast he looked gray. "I know about Mark. I know you've been sleeping with them for months." He opened his mouth to deny it, but the specific names killed the lie in his throat. He slumped against the doorframe, deflation replacing his anger. The secret he had guarded with his life was out, sitting on the carpet between us. He didn't look at me, he looked at the floor, unable to bear the weight of the truth. Then came the reaction that sealed my decision. He didn't apologize to me. He didn't cry for the pain he caused. "Does my dad know?" he whispered, terror flooding his eyes. "Raylan, if my parents find out about Mark, they'll disown me." "You can't tell them." I stared at him, incredulous. His world was crumbling, and his only concern was his inheritance and his reputation. He didn't care that he broke my heart, he only cared that I might break his cover. His narcissism was the only honest thing left. My father stepped forward, handing Caleb the envelope. "She won't tell them," Dad said, his voice ice cold. "Unless you force us to fight this in open court. Then everything becomes public record." It was a brutal ultimatum, offering him silence in exchange for a quick surrender. Caleb took the papers with trembling hands, nodding rapidly. He would trade our marriage for his secret in a heartbeat. It was a pathetic, transactional end to 4 years of love. He was protecting his life, and I was finally protecting myself. I walked to the door, my suitcase wheels rumbling on the hardwood. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the empty shell of a man standing in the ruins of our life. He was crying now, silent, selfish tears for the mess he was in. I felt nothing, no love, no hate, just a profound emptiness where my husband used to be. I stepped into the hall, and as the door clicked shut, I left my marriage, and his secrets locked inside the empty apartment. The new apartment faced east, welcoming the sunrise instead of the city smog. I woke up without the familiar knot of dread that had lived in my stomach. My room was small, filled with boxes I hadn't unpacked, but the air felt light. I could finally breathe again. Sarah was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee that didn't taste like betrayal. We shared a quiet breakfast, reading journals instead of scanning for mood swings. It was mundane, quiet, and absolutely perfect. I was finally reclaiming the peace I lost. The divorce proceedings were shockingly fast, greased by Caleb's terror of exposure. He signed everything my father sent over, without a single negotiation. There were no fights over the furniture or the savings account. He seemed desperate to erase our marriage, as quickly as I did. Elias told me Caleb was communicating only through email, his messages brief and robotic. He was hiding from the wreckage. I felt a strange mix of relief and pity. He was running away, but he had nowhere left to go. Information about his life trickled in through the grapevine. Friends told me he wasn't looking well, that he had lost weight and stopped showing up to work events. Someone mentioned seeing him at a bar on a Tuesday, disheveled and frantic. They didn't know the truth about why I left, only that he was falling apart. I listened to their reports with a clinical detachment. It felt like hearing about a patient in a different ward. I wanted him to be okay, but not enough to intervene. Then, the rumors turned darker. A friend called to say Caleb had been kicked out of his parents' house after a screaming match. Apparently, the secret he sacrificed our marriage to keep had leaked anyway. Without me there to play the role of the dutiful wife, his cover had disintegrated. He was allegedly using cocaine to cope with the fallout. The image of the health-conscious man I married doing hard drugs was impossible to reconcile. He was dismantling his life brick by brick, unsupervised and unhinged. The call came on a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks after I moved out. My phone lit up at 2 a.m., buzzing angrily. I stared at the unknown number, my heart hammering a warning against my ribs. I knew before I answered that it was bad news. Nobody calls at that hour just to chat. I slid the bar to answer, my voice thick with sleep. A stranger identified himself as an ER nurse. Caleb was still listing me as his emergency contact. "We have your husband here," the nurse said, his tone practiced and somber. He told me Caleb had been brought in after an overdose. They had tried to revive him in the ambulance, and again in the trauma bay. The words floated in the air, abstract and surreal. I waited for him to say Caleb was stable. Instead, there was a heavy pause. "I am so sorry, ma'am. He didn't make it." The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. I sat on the edge of my bed, stunned. They didn't know if it was accidental or intentional. A mix of alcohol and narcotics had stopped his heart. I wondered if he had been trying to numb the pain or end it entirely. The question gnawed at me. He had blown up his life for a fantasy, and when reality hit, it crushed him. He was a tragedy of his own making, a victim of his own suffocating fear. I had to make the call to his parents. His mother answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with worry. When I told her, the sound she made wasn't human. It was a primal wail of grief that tore through the speaker. I listened to her sob, feeling like an intruder. I gave them the hospital details and hung up. I wasn't the widow they wanted to comfort. I was the woman who knew his secrets, and now I was the only one left. I didn't cry for the body in the morgue. I had already mourned Caleb, the night he asked for a girlfriend. The man who died today was a stranger, a ghost haunting the ruins of bad decisions. I felt a profound, hollow pity for him. But the love was gone. He had died chasing a freedom that eventually killed him. I lay back down in the dark. The man I loved died weeks ago. The man who died today was a ghost I didn't recognize. The rain lashed against my new window, mirroring the gloom I imagined at the cemetery. I wasn't putting on a black dress today. I was drinking herbal tea in my pajamas, watching the steam rise in the quiet air. People expected the grieving widow, but that role died the night he asked for a mistress. Going there would only incite a riot. His parents needed to mourn their son, not glare at the woman who knew his shameful secrets. My absence was the last kindness I could offer him. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, vibrating with judgment. Messages poured in from mutual friends, asking if I was lost or stuck in traffic. "You should be here," one text read, dripping with accusation. I deleted it without replying. They didn't know he died, because he couldn't live with his own lies. They saw a tragedy. I saw the inevitable collapse of a hollow structure. Standing by his grave wouldn't fix the wreckage he left behind. I turned the phone off, silencing the chorus of people who didn't know the truth. The laptop screen glowed with the details of Caleb's personal savings account. As his legal wife, the money was technically mine. It sat there, a digital pile of cash that represented the future he destroyed. I didn't want a cent of it. Every dollar felt tainted by the deception he practiced daily. But I couldn't just let it dissolve into the ether, or go to his parents, who had rejected him in life. I needed to put it somewhere clean. I needed to turn his failure into someone else's opportunity. I pulled up the bank information for his sister's kids. They were innocent in this mess, just two smiling faces who loved their fun uncle. I typed in the routing numbers, setting up an irrevocable trust for their college tuition. It took 3 clicks to transfer everything he had. I watched the balance hit zero, with a profound sense of lightness. I wasn't keeping the spoils of war. I was planting seeds in a garden I wouldn't have to tend. The money was gone, and so was the last tie binding us. Sitting in the quiet, I thought about that first night he asked me to open our marriage. I remembered the visceral ick that coated my skin like oil. I used to think it was just jealousy or fear. Now, I recognized it as a sharp survival instinct. My body knew he was dangerous before my brain accepted it. That revulsion had been a siren screaming that the building was on fire. If I had ignored it, if I had stayed to try, I would have burned down with him. The rain stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gray. I walked to the window and opened it, letting the cool air fill the room. I was a widow at 26, but for the first time in months, I felt incredibly alive. There was no husband to manage, no secrets to guard, and no lies to navigate. I took a deep breath, tasting the fresh petrichor and freedom. I didn't say yes to polyamory, and in the end, saying no was the only vow that mattered.